nature nut. I'm not afraid to admit I'm wild about the wild things and I'm proud of it. I'm just a simple case, open and shut. No doubt about it, I'm a nature nut. Today we'll go bird watching, tomorrow we'll catch toads. The next day we'll take photographs of bugs along the road. I never get the feeling that I'm in a rut. That's why I'm a nature nut. Well, I'm a nature nut, I'm not afraid to admit I'm wild about the wild things and I'm proud of it. I'm just a simple case, open and shut. No doubt about it, I'm a nature nut. Well, hello nature nuts, how are you? Does this look like the rainforests of Belize in Central America to you? Oh, let me tell you, I'm in trouble with the crew because originally this show, we were planning on shooting it in Belize, and then at the last moment I decided, nah, let's stick around. It's nice in Canada in the winter. So here we are. One of my favorite spots, the Cave-in Basin Hot Springs in Banff National Park in Alberta. And right here at my feet, look in the water, there are some mollies. That's a Latin American fish. And they're joined here in the spring by mosquito fish. All of these are introduced species. And today, what we're going to do, we're going to look at the lives of water creatures, fishes and aquatic insects and things like that. And of course, most water creatures don't have the luxury of a hot spring to keep them toasty. Instead, they spend their winters under the ice. So think Belize and let's go check it out. Would have been nice, but... Hi, folks! Big John's Warm Stuff Emporium. How are ya? Hey, listen, just because everybody else is freezing out there on the ice doesn't mean you have to be uncomfortable. Yeah, you got your catalytic heater there, that's a handy thing. Now you watch out for carbon monoxide poisoning, and guess what? You're thinking, hey, how can he sit in a lawn chair at minus 30 degrees? Well, the answer, my friends, is right here. You put this baby in the microwave, toast her up a bit, and you can be warm for hours and hours on end, so to speak. You get it? On end. Yeah, okay. Listen, I'm gonna put down my refreshing tropical fruity flavored drink. And by the way, do you like the tropical doodads I got out here? It's all mind over matter. That's what you gotta do. You gotta think positive, think tropical. You save all that airfare. You can get right out on the frozen lake and pretend you're at Waikiki Beach. That's what I do every single time. Whoa. Look at her. Wow! Here's another thing that you can do. Get yourself a couple of these little hot guys, and are they ever handy? You just get them and you, look at that. See that little disc in there? See that disc? Kind of hard to get at that disc sometimes, but you give her a pinch. Ha! There we go! Look at that! She's starting to crystallize. See that? Crystallization. It's an exothermic reaction, and you know what that means because you know chemistry as much as Big John does. That means she's giving off heat. You just tuck that baby right into your mitt. And, apart from the feeling of having a big plastic thing inside your mitt, warm and toasty. And there is the answer to all your troubles out on the ice. You can stay warm, because you know what they say. On the ice, they say, Big John, he's your source for warm stuff. Active outdoors people dress in layers, while inactive ones dress in plenty of very thick insulation. You know, you wouldn't think it at first, but a layer of ice, maybe this thick, with some snow on top of it, is actually not a bad insulation layer, and that's why the water can stay liquid under the ice all through the winter, even if it gets down to minus 30, minus 40 up here above the ice. Very, very interesting. And what I've got here, this thing is a temperature probe that also shows us amounts of dissolved oxygen. The cable's about that long. And so let's just put it down the hole and let her equilibrate and see what happens. You know, while we're letting it equilibrate, let me remind you, there's a very neat thing about water. As water gets colder and colder, it gets heavier and heavier, like anything else. except that when it forms ice, the ice is actually lighter than the water, so it floats up to the top. The heaviest water is water at 4 degrees Celsius, so you'd expect the bottom of a lake to be 4 degrees Celsius. Now this thing, the cable is not long enough to reach all the way to the bottom of the lake, but look at that. We got 2.9 degrees Celsius, just what you'd expect, nice and balmy. If it was 2.9 degrees up here, we'd be happy. And we've got somewhere around 5 milligrams per liter of dissolved oxygen, which is plenty of dissolved oxygen to keep the fish and other critters alive. Very neat. It's actually more comfortable down there than it is up here. Go figure. Okay, well, you know my feeling, if you can get away with ice fishing out here, you can probably get away with just looking under the ice, seeing what you can see, a little nature nut stuff. So let's give that a go. First thing we have to do, clear a patch on the ice. Whew. Nice clear ice surface. Now it's time to drill the hole. Scoop away the slush, and you get your chair. And then you scoop the rest of the slush with the slush scooper. And as you can see, in broad daylight, it's just a featureless black hole in the ice. What we really need is to shadow this whole thing. Sometimes you lay down on the ice with this jacket over your head. That's a bit of a pain. How about we set up an ice fishing tent? Okay, it's all set up. Come on in. I'll show you what all the excitement's about. Well, that's much better. Instead of a black abyss at the bottom of the hole, it's a kind of a dark green abyss, because the water is filled with suspended algae that are green, and the bottom is kind of dark greenish mud as well. You can see there's a leaf down on the bottom, so you know where the bottom is. Oh, there's a water boatman. Little Carixid water bug. These are the benefits that could come to you too if you were to take up looking down holes in the ice. Oh, and look at that, over top the leaf, the silhouette of a small perch. Very cool. There, now isn't that nifty or what? And we wouldn't have seen any of that if we hadn't got in and blocked out all that glare and reflection with the good old ice fishing tent. Water boatmen are often found under the ice, along with backswimmers and diving beetles. Okay, so before we get too deeply into the idea that everything is peace and tranquility and harmony down under the ice, let me remind you that all the living things down there, every single winter, they run the deadly risk. The risk of... winter kill! The snow comes down on the ice, makes everything dark. Then plants die, cannot photosynthesize. Everything becomes death and begins to decompose. More oxygen goes away. Everybody breathes. Nobody has oxygen. Then the fish gasp for breath, and they all die. Wait, no, some of them survive. And those ones repopulate the lake. A few winters later, we have winter kill again! Oh, let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. Wait,
I need shovel. Pile up the snow. Walk out the way.
I'm sorry. It's actually not a laughing matter at all. No, sometimes winter kill can, well, it usually doesn't hurt the smaller fish in a lake, but it can wipe out the big game fish, and sometimes Fish and Wildlife people restock lakes that have been winter killed. It's a pretty serious business, and it just reminds us that there are harshnesses in the winter, whether you're above the ice or underneath it.
Oh. Winter kill affects large animals such as game fishes much more than small ones such as minnows or insects.
Hi there. Now, what do you think I'm doing out on the ice with a microphone? Well, one of the things you notice if you spend time on frozen lakes is it's kind of noisy out here. And the main sound that you hear, apart from the occasional twitterings of birds, is the sound of the ice cracking. You'll be just sitting on the ice and suddenly you hear this great booming crack. And at first it's, you know, you're like, wah! And then you realize it's okay. And it's not gonna break. It's just always cracking. And in fact, when you clear the snow off the ice, you can see all sorts of little cracks in the ice. Now, if you think it sounds neat up here, you should hear what it sounds like down underwater. So what I've got here is a microphone covered with, I don't know, some kind of thin latex waterproof sheathing. And I'm gonna place it underwater and let's have a listen. Ooh. Oh, that's neat. Yeah, you hear the big cracks, they just boom right across the lake. Water is so much better conductor of sound than air. And actually, if you lower the microphone even further, the deeper you get, the more pressure the water is under and the better it conducts sounds. And listen to that. All those little cracks. Now, I don't know if those are little cracks in the ice or whether, I mean, there might be some animals making noise down there. I know cod in the ocean make noise, and there are some freshwater cod in this lake, burbot, or ling cod they're called. They might be making noise. Some sorts of water bugs, like water boatmen, make noise. They scratch little pegs on their face. But I'll bet that's just ice cracking. I don't know. I can tell you one thing, though. There's just no end of fun to be had out on a lake like this. If you do it, take a microphone. Whoa! Incoming scuds! Far out. You see those? Man, my hole is freezing over here. But those little critters down there are scuds. They're completely different from the kind of missile that's called a scud. A lot of people call them freshwater shrimp, which is not entirely accurate. Shrimp are crustaceans, and so are scuds, but they're part of two very separate groups of crustaceans. Scuds are amphipod crustaceans, which means that they're related to beach fleas. You know, when you go to the beach by the ocean, there are all those little creatures that hop around on the beach. Those are amphipod crustaceans as well, and they're not fleas at all. They're kind of like scuds. And these scuds remain active all through the winter. They feed mostly on plant material, and they breathe through gills, so they can breathe oxygen from the water. They don't need to have access to the atmosphere to get a breath. Isn't that nice? Scuds. Biologists call them gammarids.
I wonder as I wander in the winter, what would the underwater world be like? Beneath the ice and snows, a greener pasture grows. warmer than the wind that whips across the lake. So I dreamed I was a fish down in the water, swimming naked without fear of freezing cold. Above the crystal ice becomes a nice skylight. If I had some, I am sure that I could still feel all my toes. Under the ice, where it never gets colder than a nice cold glass of lemonade. Oh, the light might fade, but it's still always liquid. Must be nice to feel sorry for us landlocked, air-breathing critters and our furry clothes, our frozen noses and our frostbite. In my dreams, the snow came down just like a mudslide.
A white one.
It covered up the lake and hid the sun. The water plants were done for, so was the oxygen. For us fishes started getting groggy, troubles had begun. But springtime came before we suffocated, and everything was ducky once again. And when I woke up in my bed, I contemplated, darn good thing it was only a dream. Under the ice, where it never gets colder than a nice cold glass of lemonade.
Oh, the light might fade,
but still it's always liquid. Must be nice to feel sorry for us landlocked, air-breathing critters and our furry clothes.
Okay, well, we've been talking so far about creatures that stay active in the water in the winter. What about creatures that hibernate underwater in the winter? Things like frogs. Now, most frogs will get down at the bottom of in the mucky bottom of their pond or their lake or whatever. Some of them can actually freeze solid, but I happen to be right now in a place where there are a couple of radio-tagged northern leopard frogs. And that's a whole different story. Now, this is a standard biological radio telemetry unit. And we'll turn her on here, tune it to the frequency of our frog. And you hear that, just barely hear that beep there? Yeah, okay. Now, this thing is directional. You aim the little piece of yellow pudding toward your signal, and you should be able, we can find where this is coming from. Oh, well, there it is. It's right on that white lily pad. And if you think that's a real frog, well, you're wrong. But it does show you how they place the transmitter. That's a plastic frog with a real transmitter, and we just put it out there for kicks. However, there is a real frog around here, very near. Just 1 second. I gotta reset the frequency, and that one's over there. And look, there's a biologist looking for it. That's Chris Kendall, and he is working on a project to reintroduce the northern leopard frog to this part of the world. And the frog in question is at the bottom of the river, on top of some silt, in a little hollow in the silt, and it's just sitting there, letting the well-oxygenated water flow over its body while it waits out the winter. I think that's wonderful. It's very fascinating, and hopefully this program will be a success. Now, I haven't told you why the river is flowing instead of frozen. This is actually a spring-fed river. It's the Raven River, and we're at a government facility for trout rearing, for stocking programs, so it just happened to be a good place to work on this frog rearing and restocking program as well. So hopefully it will be good for the frogs, and it certainly is interesting for us and our deep curiosity about what happens to water critters in the winter. You know, every time we go by a river, my 3-year-old son Jesse says, "Daddy, is it pie time?" That's because pie time is one of our favorite times. Look at this. Pie-shaped rafts of ice are forming in the river. They're making neat noises as they grind against each other and become more and more circular, grind against the ice on the side of the river. Oh, it's very exciting, very beautiful time, and it comes and it goes in a flash. Now, it was very cold last night, a clear, cold night down to about -30. The bottom of the river, the shallow river, radiated its heat up into space and became so cold that some ice actually formed right on the gravel on the bottom of the river. Anchor ice, we call it. So how about that? Ice forming on the bottom, ice forming on the top. Must be a really weird time to be a fish. But, like I say, it's one of my favorite times. It's pie time! Yay! All right, well, now let's talk about bubbles under the ice. Have you ever noticed that there are bubbles under the ice? Bubbles frozen in the ice and bubbles in the water on the underside of the ice surface. Very interesting stuff. Here at the Nature Nut, we have spared no expense. This is a high-tech underwater video camera attached to our high-tech portable production facility. And I hope they're ready for me in there, because here we go, down under the ice. And have a look at that. Woohoo! So what you notice here is that not only are there bubbles right under the ice in the water, blubbing along on the underside of the ice surface, there are also bubbles actually frozen in the ice. And it's not just bubbly here. It's not just bubbly because we drilled a hole in the ice. It's bubbly because there are bubbles everywhere. It's very important to water bugs and water beetles that there be some air under the ice, because otherwise they couldn't replace their air bubbles, their own air bubbles. They breathe atmospheric oxygen, and without the bubbles they just couldn't make it all the way through the winter. Other times you'll notice, well, here, let me show you here. You see how these bubbles are kind of stacked up, like there's a bubble and then there's some ice and then there's a bubble and then some ice, and it's like a little stack of pancakes made out of bubbles. That's because the bubbles are coming up from the bottom from the same source. And I imagine that those are probably, you know, some of those are those gassy places on the bottom of lake beds. You know how you're walking in the lake in the summer and you step down and these bubbles come up and they smell kind of bad? That's because they're full of methane, the gas that comes from decomposition. You can also, when the conditions are right, you can get a growth of algae on the underside of the ice, and of course the algae photosynthesizes, it produces oxygen, and you get more dissolved oxygen in the water right under the ice than anywhere else in the lake. Which is why, if a lake is close to winter killing, the fish will be hugged right up against the ice, trying to slurp away at that last little bit of dissolved oxygen. Maybe the ice melts in the spring before they suffocate, maybe it doesn't. And a very dramatic little story that illustrates the importance of the bubble zone to the ecology of life under the ice. Well, I guess that's about all the time we've got for the underwater winter world. I think it's quite an interesting subject, don't you? Of course, eventually spring comes along and we'll have lots of other things to look at, but for the moment, it's nifty. I hope I've inspired some of you to get your augers out, drill a few holes, have a look around. I mean, you do need some way of getting through the winter, don't you think? That's what I think, but then I'm a nature nut, and I hope you are too. We'll see you again soon. You know, the great thing is, the crew's not mad at me about the fact that we didn't get to go to Belize. Ow! And they really enjoyed this shot. Yeah, see? It's all good humored. So when they come up to the surface of the ice to replenish the bubble, there's got to be bubbles or they can't replenish the bubble. You know what I mean? That wasn't very well put. I want to say that again. But if you use your plastic wrap view-o-rama thing, do not worry. The harbinger of death will save you.
Uncensored.
Only kidding!
Ooh, it's even worse when you push it in deeper.
This isn't working at all. Didn't we try this once?